those Union soldiers that fought in the Civil War. In 1917, they will pour the very first portion of the foundation of the stadium that we know today as Camp Randall. So you learn all about the history and some of the history of the Camp Randall in terms of legendary figures like Mike LaCrone, the marching band director, and even Bucky Badger. Did you know he actually has an official name? His official name is actually Buckingham U. Badger. We all call him Bucky. Now, let me just check one other thing with you before we go on. I'm going to just do a real quick little survey. How many of you know about the Yerkes Observatory? Okay, just a couple of you. It's very interesting. The Yerkes Observatory was dedicated in 1898, and it is considered to be the origin of modern-day astrophysics. At that time, they had a 40-inch refractor telescope, which was the largest in the world. And it's still the largest refractor telescope in the world today, even though it's not used much anymore for scientific purposes. Many astrophysicists will come from this observatory, like Hubble and Sagan and others. And so you learn the history and the unique caricatures and features of this observatory, which is located in Williams Bay, Wisconsin, which is right close to Lake Geneva. More of you might know about this other one, the Badger Munition Plant. How many of you know about that? Yeah, quite a few of you. Well, what's interesting about this is I will be covering the history of this plant. The government will use eminent domain to evict 80 farmers from their land, taking up 10,500 acres. And in 1942, they will build this munition plant. It will be the largest munition plant in the world. And they will have over 23,000 people working at this plant. That's another real fascinating history. But today, let's talk about HH Bennett and his life and career in the Dells. Well, back when Bennett was doing his photography, if you wanted to have your portrait taken or you wanted to have a family photo taken, you would have to go to the photographer's studio and have your photo taken. The only people who could take photos at that time were professional photographers. And that all changed then in 1888 when George Eastman introduced the Kodak camera. And now you could purchase a camera and you could take your own photos, your portraits, your family, your home, and so forth. And that changed the whole field and philosophy of photography in quite a unique way. Today, all of us are photographers, because if you have one of these, you are a photographer. Almost all cell phones have the capability of taking photos and even making movies. And so you can take your own photos and you can see the results instantly, you can share them with others. So certainly photography has changed considerably from the time of Henry Bennett. Well, how did I get, let me just give you my background in photography. I'm not a photographer. I worked at the Wisconsin Crime Lab for 34 years as a forensic analyst. And as part of that, I was also part of what we called our field response team. And we would go and photograph and process crime scenes as well as autopsies. Now that's a pretty unique type of photography to do, and there aren't a whole lot of people that do that. And in all likelihood, most people would never want to have to do that, go and photograph autopsies. But that's kind of my background of photography. But now, how did I get interested in Henry Bennett and his photography? Back in 2024, I'm a member of the Oregon Historical Society. Here's our museum here in Oregon. If you've never been there, you will want to go and take the time to walk through and learn some of the history of Oregon, Wisconsin. It's a free museum. They're open on Tuesdays from 9 to 2 and then Saturday mornings from 9 to 12. But back in 2024, when we were looking through some of our archives, we found 24 glass plate photos. And I knew that by looking at these, they appeared to be what was called wet plate glass photos. And I knew that that was a process that Henry Bennett used when he did his photos back in the 1800s. And so I wanted to investigate that and learn a little bit more about Bennett and how he did these photos. And we also found a gentleman in Jefferson, Wisconsin, who was able to convert those glass plate photos into actual printed photos for us. And I thought I would take these three stories and combine them into a single presentation. But actually began my research by looking into Henry Bennett and actually going to his museum. And there was so much information on Henry Bennett that I thought I would just focus on Henry Bennett. I did actually combine those three things that I talked about, and I wrote an article called The Oregon Historical Society Teaching Rare Glass Plate Photos that was published in the Observer in May of 2025. If you look at this, the slides here, this first one here, that's the glass plate photo that we found in our archives. And this is called a negative glass plate photo. And by that, what that means is what normally would appear in white will show up black, and what would normally be black shows up in white. Kevin Guest of Dr. Photo then took this glass plate and did a printed photo for us at the Historical Society. I then went and took a photo of this house as it sits on Main Street in Oregon today. And I forgot the name of the people that own this house. But yeah, you're right. This house as it sits here is over 150 years old. So you can see it's been around for some time. These glass plate photos that we got in our archive, we figured go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, when that process was still being used for developing photos. All right, well, who is Henry Bennett? His name is Henry Houghton Bennett. He's named after his paternal grandfather, Henry Bennett. He's the renowned landscape photographer from the Dells. When I refer to the Dells, I'm not talking of the city, Wisconsin Dells. I'm talking of the area. If we take the actual city of Wisconsin Dells and we go north and south along the river, covering about a 15-mile distance, that area is called the Dells. So anytime I say the Dells, I'm referring to the area, not to the city. He was also a family man. In his lifetime, he will have 2 wives and 5 children. He was a carpenter, an inventor, builder, businessman, seller of photos and souvenirs, and perhaps the Dells' greatest tourist promoter. He was born in 1843 in Farnham, Quebec. And then later that year, he was born to George and Harriet Houghton Bennett. Later in 1843, they will move to the hometown of Harriet Houghton, which was Brattleboro, Vermont. In 1857, 14-year-old Henry Bennett, along with his father, will leave Brattleboro and they will come to Wisconsin. And they will go early in the spring to Kilbourn City. And they are building a railroad bridge here for the Milwaukee-La Crosse Railroad. And Henry and his father will participate in building the railroad depot in Kilbourn City. In the fall of 1857, Henry's father, George, will go back to Brattleboro Vermont, leaving Henry in Kilbourn City. And he'll continue to work in construction doing lathing, making $1.25 a day. In the spring of 1858, Henry's father will return, bringing along his wife, Henry's mother, and 7 siblings. They will move around a little bit, but they will eventually also end up in Kilbourn City, where they will have 4 more children, for a total of 12 Bennett siblings. When they arrived in 1857, Kilbourn City has only been around for about 1 year. And as I mentioned, they work in construction. And as I mentioned, his father leaves and then comes back again to Kilbourn City. When Henry is 18 years old, he will report for duty to the Union Army. He and his unit will actually come to Camp Randall here in Madison, Wisconsin to do their training. He joins the Army in September of 1861. His brother will also join in October, and he is 17. His younger brother, Albert, will attempt to join the Civil Army, but he's only 12, and they will not allow him to join. After they do their training at Camp Randall, on July 11th of 1862, he and his unit will march off to fight the Civil War. They will travel through 12 states, marching over 3,000 miles. While on picket duty at the Battle of Vicksburg in Mississippi, he will accidentally fire his rifle, firing a bullet into his right hand, limiting the use of only his middle finger and right thumb on his right hand. He will serve in the military until November 8th of 1864, when he is discharged after serving 3 years and 2 months in the military service. He's very proud of his service in the Union Army, and he will actually attend many of the Grand Army of the Republic reunions. And you can see he still wears his uniform as he gets to be an elderly person. Following the war, he will return to Kilbourn. He can no longer do construction because of his injured hand, but he's always had an interest in photography. But Kilbourn City already has a photographer by the name of Leroy Gates. Henry will buy the business from Leroy Gates, and he will rent his studio here that you see on Broadway in Kilbourn City. And in 1866, he will begin his career as a landscape photographer. Now, when Henry first began his photography, the process being used at that time was called tin plate photography, in which they take a very thin piece of metal, coat it with an emulsion, expose it to have the photo taken, and then they would process that, and the emulsion would etch an image into that metal foil or that metal plate. If you go to cemeteries, you will often see these metal plate photos on gravestones. You will see these metal photos on gravestones. You have a question?
Where is Kilbourn City? Turning off your device.
We'll get to that in a second. It's right on the Wisconsin River. I'm going to be telling you. Oh, I'll tell you now. Kilbourn City is on the Wisconsin River. In 1893, it will change its name to Kilbourn. And in 1931, it will change its name once more to Wisconsin Dells. So it is today's current Wisconsin Dells. All right? When Henry starts his career as a photographer, they are now using a new process called the wet plate photography. Here they would take a glass plate, coat it with an emulsion, then they would expose it for the photo, and then they would immediately process that. Those chemicals would etch the photo into the glass plate. It worked well. You saw one example of a glass plate photo when we were starting at the beginning of the presentation. The only problem was that it could not be transferred to any other medium, so we could not get printed photos. Then they finally developed another process in 1886 called the dry plate photo, in which again they would take the glass plate, they would etch it, they would coat it with an emulsion, they would expose it and take the photo. With the dry plate photos, they could now transfer it to a printed photo. And these did not have to be processed right away, and they could store them until they needed them. So again, it was quite an advancement in the process of taking photos. In 1866, Henry Bennett will form a lifelong relationship with the Ho-Chunk Winnebago Indians that live in this area. They do not like to have their photos taken, but through his friendship, he is able to get a large collection of Native American photos, and he will at one point have the largest collection of such photos in the United States. On January 26th of 1867, he elopes with Frances Frankie Irene Doty. He is 24, she is 18. Only Henry and Frankie know that she is 6 months pregnant. Then, 3 months later, on April 28th of 1867, they have their first daughter, Harriet Hattie Marie Bennett. They will follow this on August 15th of 1869 with a son, Ashley Clayton Bennett, and on December 2nd of 1871, another daughter, Nellie Irene Bennett. Henry will train Frankie to take portraits and how to process and print those photos. This allows him to do what he loves to do, go out and take landscape photos. Frankie will become ill, and she will go see a doctor in Milwaukee, and she will be diagnosed with tuberculosis. And on August 23rd of 1884, she will die at the age of 36. Henry will blame that disease on the long hours she would spend in the dark, damp, dark room and exposure to the harsh chemicals for the processing and developing of those photos. He will take the family records and he will change their marriage date from April 28, 1867 to 1866. So that, therefore, thereon after, if Hattie were to check or anybody else, it would appear they had been married for a year before she was born. William Metcalf, he's a businessman in Milwaukee, and he and his partner Charles Barley own one of the largest shoe and manufacturing companies in Milwaukee. Yeah.
That was Charles Bradley?
You're right, Bradley.
Sorry, that's my last
Charles
name.
Bradley. Yeah. In addition to this, William Metcalf is also a photographer. He has his own darkroom to develop his own photos. He has what was supposedly the largest photo collection in the entire state of Wisconsin. He will make trips to the Dells and he will get to know Henry, but he will also serve as an advisor and business partner with Henry. And in 1875, he will loan Henry $2,231 to purchase a lot on Broadway and build a studio. The unique feature of this studio is it has a rotating solar print studio. It's located here behind the studio, and you can see it here. Henry will go out every half hour and rotate, hand crank and rotate this studio to allow for maximum sunlight throughout the day so they can continue processing photos throughout the day. And they'll get it down and efficient enough that they will actually do up to 20,000 photos a month using this rotating solar studio. On July 19th of 1881, William Metcalf will celebrate his 60th birthday. And in celebration of his 60th birthday, he will gift this studio to Henry and Frankie Bennett. Henry is an inventor and a builder, and he not only makes his own camera, he builds his own cameras except for the lens, but he will also build the equipment he needs to process, develop, and print photos. But he's very secretive about all of this, and he swears his employees to an oath of secrecy. Prior to 1886, there was no such thing as stop-action photo. The way they would take a photo is you take the camera, you would remove the lens, expose the plate, and then put the cover back on the lens, and then develop the plate. Henry's been working on a new camera since 1876, and he finally invents one that he calls the snapper. And this is a complex camera with a complex lens. It has springs, levers, and rubber bands. And it takes a very small, thin rubber plate and moves it quickly back and forth in front of the lens. And in 1886, he captures the very first stop-action photo in the world. You probably have seen this photo. It's called The Leap of the Chasm, in which he captures his 16-year-old son, Ashley, as he leaps from the ledge to the top of Tower Rock. This, as I mentioned, is the very first stop-action photo taken in the world, and it creates quite the sensation in the photo world. Many people believe that he did not actually do that this was some trick photography that he had done. This is a classic photo that you always see of the Leap of the Chasm. And it was just recently that when I was doing my research, I actually found a second photo of that leap here, in which he's almost all the way across. Now, Henry was a perfectionist in that he wanted to get the best photo he could. So he made Ashley make this leap 17 times. Now, I'm assuming because every photo I've ever seen is him jumping from the right to the left. That means he went across 17 times and he had to come back 17 times. So he got his workout getting that photo taken. Here, 2 weeks, Henry and Ashley will spend 2 weeks with the rivermen floating these large log rafts down the river to the mills. And again, Henry captures another stop-action photo of the rope being thrown to shore. He will actually take 30 of these photos and write stories about them, becoming our very first photojournalist in the U.S. On March 25th of 1890, Henry will marry Evelyn Eva Helen Marshall. He will be 47, she will be 27. She's only 3 years older than Henry's oldest daughter, Hattie, who is 24 years old. Hattie and Eva do not get along. But Hattie will marry a gentleman by the name of Fred Snyder. He will die about 9 months after they are married. Hattie will move back in with the Bennett family, and Hattie and Eva will become the best of friends. Eva's father is George Marshall. He's an engineer who lives in Kilbourn City. He is the one that will design the large wheel under that rotating solar studio, and he will cast and mold and make that gear, and he will be the engineer who builds that rotating solar studio. Eva and Henry will have a daughter on September 9th, 1881, Miriam Eva Bennett, and they'll have a second daughter on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1895, Ruth Noel Bennett. Henry will again train Eva to take portraits, photos, but she will not do the processing and developing of the photos. She will run the business, again, while he's out taking his landscape photos. In 1899, Henry's health will begin to decline. It gets a very serious decline in 1907. On October 21st of 1907, he will see a kidney specialist in Chicago, and he will be diagnosed with Bright's disease, which is a autoimmune kidney disease. I share this disease with him. I have lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, and a kidney disease. He would take his last photo in autumn of that year of clouds while standing on the Kilbourn Railroad Bridge. You see that photo here. On November 14th of 1907, he will write his will. And on January 1st of 1908 at 5:02 a.m., he will die at the age of 64. Henry Bennett is known as the father of the Dells. And again, the Dells' greatest tourist promoter. And while he's the father of the Dells, I credit his descendants, his children and grandchildren, as being the preservers of the Dells. His daughter, Nellie, will marry George Crandall. And they will have two daughters by the name of Phyllis and Lois, which would be the granddaughters of Henry Bennett. Phyllis and Lois, along with their husbands in 1952, will make a large donation to the University of Madison, Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. This donation will include 1,200 acres of land along the Wisconsin River. The Dells Boat Company, the Crandall Hotel, the Steinbrock Amphitheater, and a portion of the Lower Dells operation. And the stipulation of this donation is that the land along the river cannot be developed, forever eliminating the building of homes, hotels, and condominiums, and restoring and keeping the beauty of the Dells along the Wisconsin River. Here's his studio that was built back in 1886. It's still there today. And in 1976, the studio and his home on Ash Street, which is just down around the corner from his studio, were added to the National Historical Places. In 2025, they celebrated the 150th anniversary of this studio, which, as I mentioned, is still there today. His house here today is a bed and breakfast. You want to go stay in his home, you can do that, and then walk around the corner or down the street and go see his studio. Here's his house. Notice this pretty fancy automobile. The driver of that automobile is Ashley Bennett, and that is his wife and daughter in the car with him. And standing along the side of the car is Eva, Miriam, and Ruth Bennett. Ruth Bennett, the last daughter of Henry and Eva, will marry Roland Dyer, and they will have a daughter by the name of Jean, which now would be the granddaughter of Henry Bennett. Jean Dyer will marry Oliver Reese. And Oliver and Jean will operate the Bennett studio for 45 years, making it the longest run, continuously run family photo studio in the country. And in 1994, they will offer this studio to the Wisconsin Historical Society to be used as a museum. It'll take the Historical Society a little while to decide to do so, and they agreed to do so. And in 2000, they will now use this as a museum. They will take an adjoining building that they will use as a museum, and they will retain the studio that Bennett used all the way back to 1886. Now, remember, it was 1875. Remember, in 1875, he built that studio for a little over $2,000. The Historical Society will spend $2.9 million purchasing the adjacent building for the museum and the restoration of his studio. Well, that brings me to the end of his history from 1843 to 1901. Much of the information you heard came from this book, HH Bennett, Photographer, His American Landscape by Sarah Raff. And many of the photos that you have seen up to this point and that you will see in the rest of the presentation come from the Wisconsin Historical Society, the HH Bennett Image Gallery, and from the Facebook page of the Friends of the HH Bennett Studio. Deb Kinder, who was going to come today and unfortunately had a relative who passed away and had to go to the funeral today. She is the great-granddaughter of Henry Bennett, and she is the one that will find and dig up all of the archives of his photo and his records and his writing, and she is the one who provides all of that information for Sarah Rath to write this book. It's too bad she couldn't make it here today, because she's never seen this presentation, so I thought she would have enjoyed it. Well, now what I want to do is I want to show you some of Henry Bennett's photos, landscape photos that he's notorious and famous for. But I don't want to just do photo after photo. So what I'm going to do, you're going to join my wife and I. We're going to go on an excursion to Kilbourn City. And we're going to go by train because we're going to leave from Milwaukee. And we're going to go to Kilbourn City. And we're going to spend some time with Henry, and we're going to spend time on the river. But you're going to have to open your mind and use your imagination, because we're going to do this in 1880. All right? So open your mind, think back that we're actually in 1880 as we go on this excursion. So if you'll allow me some liberties in the telling of my story, join me as we go on our excursion. My wife and I are taking a walk on Water Street in Milwaukee, and we run into our friend and neighbor, William Metcalf. William Metcalf, along with his business partner, Joseph Bradley, own one of the largest boot and shoe manufacturing companies in the world. We have a discussion with Mr. Metcalf, and I mentioned to him that my wife and I are thinking about taking an excursion for our first anniversary. And Mr. Metcalf says, have you ever been to the Dells? And I said, no, we've never been there. He said, you must go. He said, the scenery is beautiful, and there are many iconic landmarks, caves and canyons that you will want to see. He said, and you will want to certainly meet my dear friend, Henry Bennett, who owns the Bennett Studio. He said, I have an appointment to go to, and I must depart. But please come to my house tomorrow afternoon, and I will tell you all about the Dells. We depart, we head home. The next day, we head through the neighborhood to Mr. Metcalf's house. We are greeted by his maid, who takes us up the grand stairway to Mr. Metcalf's study office. He tells us to have a seat. He points to his portrait that he had taken at the Bennett Studio. He tells about the scenic beauty of the Dells and these iconic rock formations and landmarks. He then pulls out the stereoscope for my wife and I, along with his stereograph photos. And we spend the rest of the afternoon and early into the evening looking at these scenic views of the Dells and the iconic landmarks. It's getting late and it's time for us to leave. But before we do, Mr. Metcalf points out a large photo on the wall. And he said, this is my photo that Henry Bennett took of me in what is called the Diamond Grotto. And in order to prove you've been to the Dells, you must have your photo taken at the Diamond Grotto. He tells us he will write to his dear friend Henry, telling us that we intend to go to the Dells, and he will make arrangements for us to meet him and spend a day with him on the river, with him showing us his favorite landmarks, and for us to go to his studio and have our portraits taken. We depart, we go home, we plan for our excursion to the Dells, and we are now ready to go. We go to the Union Depot, where we will go out to the train, and we will board our train. We'll head across the state of Wisconsin, seeing wooded forests and large open farmland. And after about 3 hours of traveling on the train, we will reach the Kilbourn City Depot. As we deboard from the train, we're met by a young man who asked if we are the blocks from Milwaukee, and I say we are. He introduces himself as George Crandall. He said, my father-in-law, Henry Bennett, asked if I would meet you at the depot and make arrangements for you to get to your hotel. He escorts us to the front of the depot and we board our taxi, and the taxi will take and deliver us to our hotel. Our hotel is the Larks Hotel and Resort. This is a large resort sitting high on a bluff overlooking the narrows of the Wisconsin Dells. We are greeted as we enter the hotel by a young woman, again, who asks if we are the Blacks from Milwaukee, and we state that we are. And she introduces herself as Nellie Bennett Crandall. She says she and her husband, George, manage the Lark Hotel. She will escort us up to our room. She tells us our luggage will be delivered. She asked if we will be doing a river cruise the next day, and we say we will. She said, you will have a most delightful day. She said, if I can be of any service, let me know, and she departs. The next morning, we go down to the docks, and we board our cruise ship, the Apollo 1. The captain asks us all to stand at the front of the boat while the photographer on the deck takes our photo. He takes the photo and he removes what looks like a glass plate and he sticks it into this little box, and we don't know what he does with it, but eventually he takes it out and looks at it, and then he waves to us. He said, I am Henry Bennett. If you would like a souvenir copy of your cruise today, be sure to stop after your cruise at my studio, the Bennett Studio on Broadway. He then waves and says, have a good voyage. He turns and heads up the stairs for Broadway, and we begin our cruise down the river. We will pass many iconic landmarks like the Eagle Point and High Rock, where we actually see Eva, Miriam, and Ruth on shore. We'll continue past caves like Bass Cave and Skylight Cave, and more iconic rock formations like Lone Rock and Sugar Bowl. We'll make a sharp turn at the Devil's Elbow, where again we see Miriam, Ruth, and Eva. We'll pass another rock formation called Angel Rock. We'll see one more rock formation called the Inkstand, and we'll then enter a very narrow passage called the Navy Yard. We'll continue our journey down the river on the Apollo 1, passing a rocky cliff called Barry's Landing, and our boat will pull to a stop. The captain will lower a plank, and he tells us we are going to make our first land voyage of the river cruise, and we will be going to what is called the Witch's Gulch. We head down a pathway, and we come to a boardwalk, and before we enter the opening arch to this canyon, we are met by a tour guide. He tells us we're going to be making our passage through this canyon called the Witch's Gulch. And if we listen carefully, we can hear the cackling of the witches as the wind blows through this canyon. He tells us this canyon was made by the winds and water washing through this sandstone rock over centuries. We begin our journey, making many twists and turns as we pass through this canyon. We come to a stairway, and before we descend, our tour guide tells us we're going to be entering the Phantom's Chamber. And he said, instead of organ music, you're going to hear thundering waterfalls. And we can hear this noise, and as we descend these stairs, we see a small waterfall coming out the side of the rock. But because of the cavern-like room, it is quite loud and thunderous and difficult to hear. We then continue our journey through more passage and twists and turns. We come out one end of this canyon. We take a short break for a fresh drink of water before we begin our tour back again into the canyons and caves. We come through one final passage that our portly guests have some difficulty getting through, called Batman's Misery. We exit the Witch's Gulch. We head back onto our boat, continue our journey down the river. We enter the Narrows, passing the rock formation called Chimney Rock and Romance Cliff. As we continue down the river, we make a second stop, and they lower the plank, and the captain tells us we are making another land voyage. We'll head down a pathway, and we see before us a tall, towering rock. In fact, when we get close, we have to lean back in order to see all the way up to the top. There's a circus barker standing there yelling, "Come one, come all, gather round," and so we approach. He tells us that we are standing in the ceremonial ground of the Ho Chunk Indian, who have used these grounds for decades for their celebration. He tells us standing behind him is this rock tower called Tower Rock, and it's some 80 feet high. He tells us we are very fortunate today because we're going to see something very unusual and unique. He said we'll see somebody make a death-defying leap from the top of that ledge all the way across the chasm to the top of Tower Rock. And he points to the top of the rock and he says, up yonder is young Ashley Bennett. And he's going to make this death-defying leap. One miscalculation or slip will lead to an 80-foot fall and certain death. He said, let's encourage Ashley to make this leap by counting down from 3. And he counts down 3, 2, 1. And we watch Ashley as he flies through the air, holding our breath, and he safely lands on top of the Tower Rock, where he removes his hat and takes a bow, and we give him a round of applause. The Barker holds up a large photo of this leap where Ashley's captured in midair, and he tells us this was the first stop-action photo ever taken in the world. If you would like your souvenir copy of this photo, be sure to stop at the Bennett studio following your cruise to buy your copy. He said, now, let's get Mr. Ashley back onto the ledge by counting down once more. So we again join in counting 3, 2, 1, and we again watch Ashley fly through the air, landing on the ledge, where he once more removes his hat and takes a bow, and we give him a round of applause. We continue our journey back to our boat. We'll travel more down the river, seeing the scenic beauty, cliffs, caves, and rock formations, finally passing under the Kilbourn City Railroad Bridge and docking at the Dells Boat Company. It's been a long, thrilling, exciting day, and we return to our hotel. The next day, we make our journey down Broadway, heading towards Bennett's studio. As we approach the studio, we see his rotating solar studio behind the brick building. When we enter the retail store, we are met by a young woman who introduces herself as Hattie Bennett Schneider. She asks if she can help us. And we say, well, we are here to see Mr. Bennett have a cruise on the river. She said, well, that's my father. He's down at the docks taking photos of the river cruise boats. He'll return shortly. She said, can I help you with anything else? We said, well, we are here to have our portraits taken. And as we mentioned this, a woman walks into the room through a back door. And Hattie tells us that this is Frankie Bennett, her mother, and that she can take our portraits. She takes us through a door back into a studio, and there's a large bellow camera, and she has us sit in a chair and pose as she takes our portraits. After she takes our portraits, she tells us we can return to the sales room and pick out frames for our portraits. She then turns through another door into a back room that appears to be the dark room, where she will process and develop those portraits. Adjacent to that, we see another room that looks like perhaps it is Mr. Bennett's office and work room. We return to the sales room, we pick out our frame. A young gentleman walks in, and Hattie tells us, oh, this is my brother, Ashley Bennett. Ashley tells us that we are to meet his father down at the river to go on the cruise. He escorts us down to the river, where we see Henry sitting on the front of his rowboat, and Ashley returns to the studio. We get in his rowboat, we begin our journey down the river. Our first stop is at Overhang Rock Cave. We enter this cave, and looking out, we can see the rock formation called Lone Rock. I mentioned to Mr. Bennett that I saw this photo in his studio. He said, yes, he had taken 4 large negatives and combined them to make this one large photo. That photo was 18 inches high and 5 feet long, making it the longest photo in the U.S. at that time. We continue our journey down. We come to a cave called Boat Cave, only big enough for a very small boat to enter and exit. He tells us one of his secrets of photography when we're at Boat Cave. He said because caves are dark, you would have to expose those plates for long periods of time, hours or longer. In order to speed up the process, he will whitewash the walls of these caves, making the exposure time shorter and giving clarity to the photos. We'll continue down the river, going past Leland Point and Steamboat Rock. We will then enter one more cave called the Cave of the Dark Water. And he says if you look out through the entrance, you can actually see your reflection in the water. And another example of the walls being whitewashed to give clarity to his photos. We'll continue on down the river, passing other landmarks like Hawk's Bill and the Devil's Football. We spent most of the morning on the river now, and we're going to take a break for lunch. He tells us that this is one of his favorite caves called the Luncheon Hall, and he would always bring his family here on Sundays for a picnic lunch. We share our picnic lunch with him that Hattie Bennett paid for us back at our Lark Hotel. And I mentioned to him that Mr. Metcalf has told me a little bit about his life and career in Kilbourn City, particularly as a photographer. But I asked if he will share his life story of Kilbourn City. And he does. He tells us that he and his father came to Kilbourn City early in 1857, where they were building a railroad bridge for the Milwaukee Lacrosse Railroad. And he and his father will work in construction. Late in 1857, his father returned to Brattleboro, Vermont, and he remains behind, continuing to work in construction. His father, mother, and siblings will return in early 1858, and they will eventually settle in Kilbourn City and have 4 more children for a total of 12 Bennett siblings. He says at the age of 18, in 1861, he reports for active duty, and he does his training at Camp Arundel in Madison, and he marches off to war. And while at war, he will accidentally shoot himself, injuring his right hand, and he can no longer do construction when he returns to Kilbourn City following the war. He said he has an interest in photography, and he purchases the photo business from Leroy Gates, another photographer that was in Kilbourn City. And he began his career as a photographer in 1866, taking landscape photos. He will be commissioned to take many photos in addition to landscape. He will take photos in Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and other big cities. He will have a photo exhibit that will be shown at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1883. While he said he enjoys doing those kind of photos, he will always return to Kilbourn City and its scenic beauty, and Kilbourn will always be his home. At this point now, we're ready to continue our journey. We get back in his boat. We head down the river. We come to the Sugar Bowl, and he tells us he wants to stop and take some photos of this iconic landmark. And we watch him as he scatters and climbs up the side of the cliff. And he tells us that he tries to take many different versions and angles of these iconic rock formations, so he has multiple different ways to sell these photos in his shop. After he takes his photo, we get back in his boat and we continue down, and we come across a high rocky cliff with many openings in the side of that rock. And we see hundreds of swallows flying in and out. And he tells us this is called Swallow's Nest. And he said if there are lots of birds in the spring, that means we're going to have a long, hot summer. And he said it's already been a long, hot summer. He then tells us he's going to take us to his 2 favorite landmarks. The first is called the Giant's Hand. And indeed, it looks like a large hand protruding out of the water. And another example of whitewashing of the walls. He then takes us to his most favorite landmark called the Diamond Grotto. And he says in order to prove that you've been to the Dells, you must have your photo taken at the Diamond Grotto. We climb into this rock formation and he takes our photo. We get back into his rowboat and we are heading back to our starting point. I mentioned to Mr. Bennett, you must get pretty tired rowing on the river like this all day long. He says, no. He said, I do this every day to go out and get my photos. And he said prior to the steamboats coming for the river cruise, we would hire out as tour guides and we would row up and down the river showing people the caves, canyons, and rock formations. We reach our starting point. He heads back to the studio. We return to our hotel. Again, another long, exhausting, but thrilling day. The next morning, we get ready to depart from the Lark Hotel. We are met in the lobby by Nellie and George Crandall. They asked if we enjoyed our stay, and we say we most certainly have. And they say, come again, and we say we most certainly will. I mentioned that I go to excuse myself to go pay for my lodging. And George Crandall says, no, don't worry about that. You need not worry about paying. And I go, what? He said, Mr. Metcalf has already made arrangements for your lodging in celebration of your first anniversary. We thank them profusely for this gift. And it's now time to depart, and we say our goodbyes. We again head down Broadway towards the Bennett studio, and we actually see Ashley riding his bicycle down Broadway. We again enter the studio. We are once more met by Hattie Bennett, who asks, or tells us, be sure to look at our souvenirs, photos, and postcards, and make sure you look over the handmade Native American souvenirs, as we have the largest collection not only in Kilbourn, but in all of Wisconsin. We'll look and spend time looking at these souvenirs. I will purchase 24 postcards, 12 stereograph photos, and now we look at the Native American handmade items, and we have difficulty deciding what it is we would like to purchase. My wife eventually decides to buy a beaded necklace and a woven basket. I purchase a tomahawk and a ceremonial pipe. I set them on the counter, and as I do that, Ashley and Frankie Bennett come out carrying our portraits. We're amazed at how life-looking these portraits are. It does a wonderful job of capturing the dignified lawyer that I am, and it portrays the beauty and charm of my lovely wife. We're amazed at these photos, and as we're commenting on these photos, Mr. Bennett comes out carrying a large photo that he had taken of us in the Diamond Grotto. Again, we're amazed at the beauty of this photo, and we're left speechless. I mentioned to them, just place those photos over by our souvenirs, and I will pay for them when we leave. And Harriet tells us, oh, you need not worry about paying for your photos, your portraits. And I say, well, why not? She said, oh, Mr. Metcalf has already made arrangements for that in celebration of your first anniversary. And Henry Bennett then speaks up and says, oh, likewise, you need not worry about paying for your Diamond Grotto photo, as the Bennett family will gift that to you also for your first anniversary. We are left speechless, and we thank them profusely for these gifts. But it's now time to depart. When we head out for the Kilbourn depot, where again we will board our train. As we leave Kilbourn City, we get one last glimpse of the Wisconsin River and the iconic rock formation called the Inkstand. We travel again across the state of Wisconsin, passing through many small villages, and we return to the Union Station in Milwaukee and return to our home. We will share our excursion with our family and our friends, showing them our photos, our portraits, our souvenirs, and encourage them to make trips to the Dells. We are heartbroken when we get the news on August 26th of 1884 that Frankie Bennett has died at the age of 36. We'll attend the funeral of our friend, neighbor, and benefactor, William Metcalf, who dies on April 8th of 1892. In 1906, we will go back to Kilbourn City for another trip and excursion for our 25th wedding anniversary. Mr. Bennett's health is declining. He no longer goes out and takes photos on a daily basis, and he no longer can give river cruise tours. He tells us They are planning to build a dam in Kilbourn City to expand manufacturing in Kilbourn City, and he's opposed to the construction of this dam. He wants Kilbourn City to remain a tourist destination for its scenic beauty and iconic landmarks. He will write letters in opposition and talk to political leaders in the state, but he has lost this battle, and the construction of the dam has begun. We're greatly saddened when we get the news on January 1st of 1908 that Henry Bennett has died at the age of 61. In March of 1909, we will receive a letter from Eva Bennett, and she will tell us that the Kilbourn Dam has now been completed and opened, forever changing the landscape of the dells. It has now created an upper and a lower dells, and it has raised the water level 17 feet in the upper dells, burying and obscuring many of those iconic landmarks. Some of those landmarks that have been lost are the Boat Cave, the Bass Cave, the Navy Yard, and his two favorite iconic landmarks, the Giant's Hand and the Diamond Grotto. We will be forever thankful that we had Mr. Bennett take our photo at the Diamond Grotto when we celebrated our first anniversary there in 1880. Well, that brings me to the end of my story of our excursion to the dells and to the end of the story of Henry Bennett, his life and photographs, who will always be known as the father of the dells. Now, what is the dells today? I'm sure Mr. Bennett never envisioned that some 150 years later it would be what it is today. Today it is known as the water park capital of the world, with over 20 water parks and over 200 water slides, requiring 16 million gallons of water a day to operate. They have over 10,000 rooms, making it the largest number of rooms available anywhere in the state of Wisconsin. It's one of the top tourist attractions in the state of Wisconsin. The city of Wisconsin Dells actually borders 4 counties, Columbia, Sauk, Adams, and Juneau. And it's that 15-mile area where these 4 counties merge, which is known as the Dells. Normally, the Dells has a population of 3,600. 2,450 of those actually live in what would be the portion of Columbia County. They will have over 55,000 tourists a day during the season, and some 3 million total over that season. These are all photos of Miriam Bennett. She will actually go and graduate from Rockford College. And she has a love of her father's photo. And she is the one who we will give credit to for the archiving of his photos and negatives and his writing. He kept very accurate details of his photos and his process and his development of photographic equipment. And you can see how she has aged over the years, and she will spend the rest of her life actually working at the Bennett studio. There just happened to be more photos of Miriam than of any of the other Bennetts when I was doing my research. We took our trip in 1880. We didn't have colored photos back then, so I wanted to do our excursion and have you share that experience all in black and white. But I wanted to show you what they looked like in 1880 and what it looks like today. That studio is there. It is part of the Wisconsin Historical Society. You can go there, pay a fee, and go in and see the museum and his studio. If you want to try and make that daring leap across the chasm, you can go into the museum, and on the carpet they have the top of the ledge and the top of Tower Rock, and you can make that leap. I can't make that leap anymore. I just simply walked across. Now that chasm looked really large, because it's 80 feet high, but it's actually only 5 feet 10 inches. So it's not that long a leap, but at my age it becomes a real challenge. I actually saw photos in my research with the Bennett family sitting on the top of that Tower Rock, which means even the kids had to make that jump over the top of Tower Rock. And here are some of these iconic landmarks, the Lone Rock back in 1880 and what it looks like today. Here's Ashley making the leap. Humans are no longer allowed to make that leap. Some didn't make it. And so today it is made by a dog, usually a German Shepherd. Again, here's some more of the rock formations, Chimney Rock, Romance Cliff, back in 1880 today, Swallow's Nest today, and the Sugar Bowl again today. When I was doing my research, I couldn't find black and white photos of Native American handmade items, so through the magic of PowerPoint, I was able to convert them to black and white so we could stay consistent with our timeline. Likewise, the studio, if you go there today, this is what you will actually see. This is the studio that is there today and was used by Henry Bennett. And you'll see this large bellow camera. And again, I couldn't find it in black and white, so I reproduced it in black and white. When Henry Bennett took his photos, there were not colored photos. That didn't come around until sometime around the early 1900s or so. But what they would do is they would take the black and whites and they would hand paint them to create colored photos. This is actually Hattie Bennett here in black and white and a painted one. Robin Clark did this painting. But Hattie was very talented, and she would take her father's black and white photos and hand paint them to create colored photos during her time. And these are some examples of the Native American photos that he had in his collection. And again, you can see the black and white and then converted to color. And perhaps the greatest change is our river tours have not changed much. Here's our boat when we took it in 1880. Here it is today. They will see many of the same iconic landmarks, caves, and cliffs and so forth. And they will even go on the same land version trip in terms of the Witch's Gulch. But what has changed is what are now called the ducks. These are World War II amphibian vehicles that can go on land and water. If you've ever been on one, they're a lot of fun. If you ever go, don't sit in the very last seats, because when they go into the water, that's where the water comes into the boat first. I remember going on a cruise on a duck, and we're heading through the forest area, and on our left was very steep terrain with a forest, pine forest, and on the right we were on a high cliff, dropped off right into the river. And our driver stopped and he told us we have to make a very sharp turn coming up ahead here to the left. He said, but we've taken all kinds of precautions to make sure it's safe. And he said, we put up a chicken fence. He said, and we think that if it can hold a chicken, it can certainly hold a duck. And off we went, and we successfully made that turn around that curve. I always remember that story from having gone to the Dalles. Well, as I mentioned, Henry Bennett does actually have 3 living great-granddaughters. 2 of them, Debbie Kinder and Betsy Grant, still live in Baraboo. And Debbie Kinder is the president of the Friends of the HH Bennett Museum. And they operate the Facebook for that. And then the 3rd granddaughter is Amy Dyer Hendrickson now. And I don't know if she lives actually in Wisconsin Dells, or she still lives in Wisconsin, but I don't know if she lives right in the Dells. And these would be I'm sure there are great-great-great-grandchildren from these descendants as well. Obviously, with 12 siblings, there were a lot of Bennetts in the Wisconsin Dells area. Well, that brings me to the end of our presentation. Again, if you want to read more about Henry, there's a lot more to know about Henry. Get the book HH Bennett by Sarah Rath, and you'll be able to get much more information. I want to thank you for your time and your attention. I hope you found it informational and educational. You learned something now about Wisconsin's perhaps most famous photographer, HH Bennett from the Wisconsin Dells. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer those for you. Otherwise, you all have a good rest of the day. Thank you.